So Aspergillus nodules. I'm going to talk a little bit about what are they, because it's a funny kind of a word, and why they're so difficult for a doctor to manage. And then we're going to talk a little bit about whether they need to be treated with antifungals, because that's something that's being discussed at the moment in medicine. So what are fungal lung nodules? So a lung nodule, it's a bit of a catch-all term. So when you get a CT or an X-ray, it's if they can see like a blob, like a light dot. So not sort of in a cavity or something, just sort of a mass. So there's a couple of pictures on here of what they might look like on a scan, and it's not always obvious just from the scan what they are. So lots of different things can cause it to happen, and a lot of the causes are quite benign, but they often investigated because they can be tumours or infections, so fungi or things like TB, and also some autoimmune diseases can cause you to grow little masses. So if it's found, it gets investigated. It's not necessarily something that happens in people who are just immunocompromised. So you can get fungal nodules caused by quite a few different fungi, actually, in people that don't otherwise have sort of an immune problem. And in fact, there's a different kind of fungus in America called coccidioides, also known as valley fever, and people get exposed to it through dust, either just outside or sort of if there's a lot of building works, and they can grow these nodules and not really know about it for a long time, and it's just sort of dormant in there. So it's when you find something, you don't know until you properly have a look at it what it is. So a lot of people that end up with in this group with an Aspergillus nodule, a lot of them the channel they come through is where it's been investigated because they thought it might be lung cancer, which obviously is sort of very urgent investigation. And it is actually quite difficult to tell the difference just from symptoms and scan, because on the scan, the sort of key signs you would look for is it cancer is it's called spiculation. It's like these sort of long sort of spikes that come out of it. That's usually a dead giveaway for cancer, but actually Aspergillus can do that as well. And there's another type of scan that they might follow up with called a PET scan that looks at sort of how metabolically active it is. And usually if that comes back positive, that's usually a dead giveaway for cancer. But again, Aspergillus can look the same. So and the clinical symptoms are quite often very similar. So, sort of general unwell, losing weight, cough, fever. So people often get put by their GP, get put into the sort of a cancer investigation pathway. But then there's two things that can happen then. So you might get a biopsy. So they put a needle between the ribs and take a little sample of it. Or you might have that part of the lung. It's called resected, so surgically removed. So those are sort of two options that might happen, and then they'll have a look under the microscope what's actually in this nodule, and usually it's quite good if you can rule out cancer. That's a good thing. So if you see a lot of, they call it fungal elements such as hyphae, so just like the little strands, like sort of like the little strands of mold, you might see the whole thing's absolutely packed with them, and I'll show you a picture in a bit of what that looks like. And so if you see that under the microscope, then the result that you'll get doesn't look like cancer, you've got a fungal nodule. So they're quite variable. You can get very small ones, so just sort of a couple of centimeters, without a cavity. And it's quite unusual, and we don't know that much about what happens. So they call it the natural history of a disease. So when you've got one of those things, how does it behave over time, over the course of several years? how often does it progress and become full CPA? And it's also not clear at the moment how to manage them. Um, the the guidelines, the general guidelines, recommend following them up regularly. So doing scans every 3 to 6 months to begin with, um, to see whether it's getting bigger and whether there's more appearing, um, and antifungal therapy for patients who they think need it. But the problem is with guidelines, it's almost trying to give a one size fits all solution to a problem that there's lots of different kinds within it. So oops, sorry. So what we want to do is really refine that and find out out of people who've got these nodules, how do we know which ones need this type of treatment? How, who's at risk of it progressing? We want as much information as possible. So that picture, that's what the biopsy might look like if it's fungal. So you can see it's kind of got these like these purple things with the little joints in it, and the branches. That's what the hyphae look like when you zoom right in. So that they are tricky to manage. Even a doctor even a consultant with experience of aspergillosis, it's difficult. It is a challenge to know what to do about these. So partly because it's really rare and it's hard for a doctor to build their own experience or build experience within a centre, and it's hard to generate any new research. So with research, what you want always is a big patient group, and then you can really put numbers on how many people it progresses, how many people need treatments. If you don't have a lot of patients, it's very, very, very difficult to get meaningful research. So that's one thing that NAC is able to do that a lot of other places just can't really get started with. And it is very, very variable, like I said. Another thing that complicates it is things like the blood tests that we normally do for CPA. They can behave differently for nodules. So actually, people who do have an Aspergillus nodule, about half of them, when you do the IgG blood test, it'll come back negative. So if you've got a nodule, you can't just sort of do the blood tests and see whether it's Aspergillus from that. It doesn't work. So, oops, my mouse is misbehaving a bit today. So, what our consultants did, so it was Dr. Bazaz and Dr. Kosmidis were the ones leading this. They looked at all the patients we've got on our books at NAC and looked at sort of their characteristics and how they got diagnosed, whether they got antifungals and what their outcomes were. And it's very difficult research to summarize because almost every single person in it is different. So there's 24 people that they found, and they were very, very, very variable. You don't have to read all of this. This is just the summary, so that you can see it's almost, we had to sort of almost describe each person individually almost, which is not very satisfying with research. So some people, the nodules just stay very stable over time. Some of them, after months or a couple of years, they started to develop a little cavity, or the nodules, they might sort of start to necrose in the middle or get a bit calcified. There's a lot of different courses of disease through them. Some people got new ones, some people didn't. It was very difficult to pull out patterns between them. So what we did on the poster actually was just sort of picked 3 cases and just put the cases on so that people can see the scans and the history. So the 2 cases, the case 1 and 3 on the left, those were both elderly men, maybe people that you'd expect more to have Aspergillus. So they both had COPD, which obviously is one of the big risk factors. And you can see the picture of one of them at the top. But the other case on the right, that was a woman my age. She had a history of asthma and pneumothorax, like collapsed lung, and she'd already had part of one of her lung, the top of her right lung, removed because there'd been an aspergilloma in there. So very, very, very different types of patients there. And yeah, she actually started off, she had 2 nodules, and she had, so they, in her case, they thought, yeah, this does need azoles. And after 8 months, it was working, basically. They'd reduced in size, and she was ultimately diagnosed with full CPA, so she'll be treated sort of as normal CPA now. Whereas the 2 older men, it was less clear. So one of them, he had antifungals, it showed an improvement, and they thought it was probably CPA, but it wasn't 100% clear yet. So they just have to follow his progress basically over time. And the other guy, he received azoles for a couple of years. It reduced in size, but then he got new ones, and those were cavitating nodules, which is more of a worrying sign. So like even just with these 3 patients, very, very different types of people, and the sort of the cases played out quite differently. So out of the experience at NAC, what our doctors are proposing is antifungals aren't necessarily helpful for everyone. So they don't really recommend that if you've got an aspergillus nodule, then you should get antifungals. They don't think that's the best way to manage things. So if the whole area has been surgically removed, the guidelines are already that you don't really need antifungals. It probably won't sort of spread from that site. And if the nodules just seem stable and dormant, then there's probably not really any benefit to having antifungals, because obviously antifungals, they're quite harsh. They're not fun drugs to be on. So if you don't need them, then it's best not to have them. Really, the key part of it is the monitoring. So CT scans repeated, and it has to be long term, to see, just to keep an eye on what the nodule's doing, because even if it's stable for a while, if somebody's immune status changes, then the nodule could change what it's doing. And also things can come back. They can come back after they've been removed, and in some people you get more appearing, and those nodules, they have to be taken seriously. They have to be checked out, they have to be monitored, and some of them will need their own biopsies. So actually, in one patient that they found in this study, they found somebody, he'd had 1 aspergillus nodule, then a couple of years later some more appeared, but one of the new nodules was actually, it turned out it was actually a lung cancer. So they couldn't just say, oh well, he's had an aspergillus nodule once, everything from now on must be aspergillus. That wasn't the case. Everything needed to be properly checked out, and also you may or may not progress to CPA. So each person has to be monitored, and it's very individual. So if you have any concerns, if you've got a nodule and you've got some concerns, like you're feeling worse, or if you're not sure why you're not receiving antifungals, like if it hasn't been explained to you properly, then you just have to ask your own doctor, your own care team, because every case is individual. So it's not a condition where you can come into the support group and sort of swap notes with other people with lung nodules and get opinions from other people with the same diagnosis. Unfortunately, it's not really one of them. It's very individual, and if you don't feel like you've been given enough information, you just keep asking your doctor. But if you're not being given antifungals, it's not necessarily something to worry about. There's some very good reasons why you might not need them.
Living with COVID. Are we there now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hurrah. Okay, so at the time of our last talk, I think we were tracking, this is number of patients admitted to hospital, which is probably the most important figure, other than deaths. It's gradually been rising since the beginning of July, very slowly, and it kind of peaked here and went down it, but it's gone back up again here. So we're still showing steady growth in numbers, and this is only to the end of September. So we haven't, there's no influence of vaccines kicking in on here yet, or the new boosters anyway. But you can see it's still pretty low compared to the entire rest of the pandemic. So nobody's worrying about it too much just yet, but we'd like to see that peak and start to come down. I thought it had last week, but it seems to have gone back up again. So that's kind of, it's good and not so good at the same time. The variant that we talked about last month called Eris seems to be mostly driving this current very slow surge. But now there are two more. There are two more. So Erin is causing about 37% of cases. This one, XBB.1.1.6, is about 30%. And XBB, the original strain, is at 25%. So it's a mixture of viruses, of COVID viruses, causing this current slow surge. The one we're hearing loads about is called BA2.86, which has been given the name Pirola. And they were worried about that last month, 4 weeks ago, and they're still worried about it based on all the mutations it carries on its spike protein. It looks a lot like something that could spread rapidly, but in practice, it's been hanging around for months now, and it's slowly increasing, but the increase as of mid-September is only 48 cases so far, and that's in the whole of UK. So really that's struggling to impress. These others are driving the surge. This one, which is the reason why the booster vaccinations were brought forward, has not really kicked off yet. So we're not, still concerned, but there's no evidence that it's going to spread wildly. The normal resource that I use, which is the Zoe COVID numbering system, number of cases of COVID, which works from people's apps on their smartphone, hasn't been updated for about 3 weeks now. So that is, it looks like that's become defunct. So I can't refer to that as to what will happen in the near future. This variant, and maybe this variant, or it may be one of those other two that we've just talked about, has the standard symptoms, but one thing that most people are talking about right now who seem to be getting COVID, a lot of people seem to be talking about quite nasty diarrhea with it. So that's certainly a symptom to look out for. If you have that, you may have COVID, which it's always been there because there are lots of receptors in the gut for this virus, but it just seems a sort of a hearsay. Quite a few people seem to be talking about the diarrhea as a prominent symptom this time. So there's an autumn booster campaign. Now, I was going to say to everyone at this point, how many people have had the booster? You should probably, most of you should have the booster by now. But following Chris's talk, I think everyone's had it. Has anyone not had the booster by now?
I haven't.
One person.
No,
and that's because you can't get someone to do it.
That's right, yeah.
Mick, if you look in the chat, I've dropped a link in there, and it's a list of all different walk-in clinics in Suffolk, and it's got like opening times and days and stuff. If you've probably seen it, but
I've got that list. Unfortunately, a lot of them are on main roads with no parking facilities.
Yeah,
and they're not easy to go. I have found one, but it's a 30-mile round trip. But never mind.
Worth
Well,
it, yeah.
Hopefully your GP will kick in soon.
Excuse me for laughing.
What
GP?
We seem to mostly be getting flu and being offered COVID and flu at the same time, which has mixed attractions. I don't think people don't seem to be reporting it any more. Makes your arm any more sore than last time. We're getting ours as well because the health service is a priority for vaccination shortly, so I will be able to sympathise next month. And the aim was to, this is why I mentioned it, the aim is to vaccinate everybody vulnerable by late October. So certainly if you haven't had it by now, your doctor should be exacerbating a booster as soon as possible. But we've got 3 weeks, have we, before the end of October? The standard eligibility that I put up last time, just for information for people looking at this in future, because we're recording this. And there you go. Has everyone been contacted? I think everyone's been contacted, but all but 1 or 2 have not had it. So that's good news. It's getting around everybody quite quickly, and most people in this group would probably be in the priority group to be vaccinated. So pretty much the standard, same. That's September's summary. October is pretty much the same. We're just vaccinating and learning to live with this virus. The increase at the moment is happening. We may be more or less expecting it because we're going into August, into the autumn. But it's very slow, and you can see that it's nothing. There is no resemblance to the earlier huge growth of infected people. And there's virtually nobody. There's a couple of dozen, maybe 3 or 4 dozen people who are actually ending up in a hospital and dying from this now, which is tiny numbers compared to where it was. So the risk is very, very low indeed. Interestingly, when I was gathering information, which I should sort of do on a weekly basis, as I said, they were not updating the data dashboard that I normally use, and it was 2 or 3 weeks out of date. Turns out they've actually been designing a new one. So the UK Health Security Agency, which is a new body set up by the Prime Minister a couple of years ago, I think it was, has set up a new data dashboard which covers all infectious viruses, respiratory viruses. Maybe we can visit that and try not to ruin everything. Verify. Okay, so hide the cookies. So we have now got the UHSA data dashboard. In that, there is COVID. Here's all the relevant information for COVID. Patients admitted less than 4,000 now, which is a rise on the previous week. When is this?
I can't see it.
Can you not see it?
No.
It's because you're sharing presentation mode, not full screen mode.
Well, let's leave that as it is. I'll just talk about it. on it, you can get information on COVID, also on flu. Currently, you'll be glad to know the hospital admission rate for flu this year is 0. Nobody has been admitted to hospital with flu so far. We're a little bit early yet, but we expect cases to start rising in October. So that's something to be aware of and to be wary of. And you can refer to this website when that happens. Also, the other respiratory viruses, these are much less common. There's rhinovirus, which is the common cold virus. It's quite handy to know when that's high and circulating around in the UK. And it generally remains pretty steady as everyone gets a cold maybe once a year or so. So it just gives you some hints as whether how to protect yourselves when you're out, whether there's a lot of virus about or there isn't. And this is kept reasonably up to date. 2 weeks old, this information, so it's not that great, but it's not that bad. And if there are any spikes, like there was a spike here last year of RSV around this time of year, in November, December.
Yeah, I had it. It was horrible.
It's good to be aware that that's around as well. So that's quite a handy thing. If only I could show it to you. But there's the website address to go to it, and this is the recording of this will come out in a week or so. So on to my next subject. So I meant to talk about this last month, and we have time today, I think, yes. So I'll talk about it today instead, and that the subject was outdoor air pollution, which is something we're all familiar with. I've actually been using, some of you will know the gadget that we have for measuring air pollution that you can on the personal level that you can carry around with you, that we had sort of 3 or 4 years ago. I've now got that, and I've been running it for weeks now, and that is consistently showing really bad particulate air pollution. I think it's broken because it's just showing the same thing every day, variable amounts, but maybe there's a lot of particulate pollution around where I've left it. It's currently in my house, so, but it just goes to show that there are lots of different types of pollution. We talk a lot. I've talked a lot in here, and this is based on an article in New Scientist. If you want to read the whole thing, this issue goes. I think this was July's issue, or an issue in July. Anyway, I thought it quite interesting to talk about the other types of pollutants. We talked a lot about all the gases, the sulfur dioxides, carbon monoxides, nitrous oxides that are irritant, and we've come across a lot of those as a result of traffic and lorries and all kinds of things pumping out essentially burnt fossil fuel fumes into the air. But there are other aspects of that are just as important. This is just about what we know currently. Asthma and breathlessness can worsen in highly polluted areas in big cities, such as London and Manchester. And we know that there are about 1,200 asthma deaths per year in the UK, and at least some of them, if not a large proportion of them, are likely to be due to air pollution, including the well-publicised case from a few years back of a young girl who died from air pollution, and she was an asthmatic, if I remember rightly. Just in support of you, Les, those clean air zones around London and around Manchester and all the other big cities have been in place in London longer, and those clean air zones are helping reduce these numbers in those areas. So they are worth doing. It's how they do it that's causing the controversy, I guess. So one of the big pollutants are particulates. This is essentially soot, but soot comes in a whole variety of particle sizes. It comes from wildfire smoke. It comes from those fires that you can have in your homes now. It comes from car exhausts, truck tires, even rubber wears off vehicle tires and creates an incredibly fine dust that you can breathe in. There's also very fine plastic waste around as well, and I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail in a minute. These toxins, these irritants, don't just affect our lungs, but our lungs are the point of entry into our bodies. So they affect all kinds of things. It's not just respiratory disease, it's lots of other things. How do they get in? We tend to measure particulates in a variety of sizes. PM 2.5 is one of the smallest sizes, and if something is that size, something at PM2, if we look at this diagram here, obviously this is somebody's airways, and the smaller the particle, the further down the airways and into the lungs the particle can penetrate. So if it's something 9 or 10 micromolar particle, it will only get as far as your sinus. It'll be captured there and kept there. If it's 2 to 3 or less, we're talking about quite far down the bronchial tree and even into the actual alveoli right at the end. So these small particles can penetrate all the way down. And there's a picture of, I think this is meant to say small particles are penetrated through the lungs, through the parenchyma, and right down to the ends. At the ends of all these trees, there are these alveoli, which are tiny sacs surrounded with blood, because this is where the oxygen and the carbon dioxide is exchanged with the blood as part of our normal functioning of our lungs. And these particles can get right down there to those tiny sacs and get in them and cause inflammation. So this particular size is probably the most dangerous. And of course, we know from our work that Aspergillus spores are about this size. So this is how Aspergillus can get into your lungs and penetrate all the way down to the alveoli. And if it can start growing, then it starts causing aspergillosis. The normal situation is that you have a lot of defenses to this, to anything that penetrates your lungs that far. One of which is called a macrophage. Alveolar macrophages, not surprisingly, live in alveoli, and they will attempt to ingest these particles. Now, I have a video here. I've got time, so let's see if I can. Mind you, you won't be able to see it anyway. Hang on, stop. Let's see if I can. Getting too cocky now. This isn't going to work, is it?
Nothing else has.
Can you see that?
Yeah, small.
You can? It's small. Well, I'm going to carry on because I'm not having a good time here. So we have got these tiny specks which represent items, particles that are about the size that we're talking about, and these larger structures are the macrophages. And if we run it slightly, we can see these particles are captured by the macrophages. This one's got hundreds of them, and that one's capturing them as well. And that's the natural way. And there's another tiny little cell up there capturing them. That's the natural way that all these particles would be removed from the air that you breathe in, and removed from your lungs, which is quite fun.
Yeah, so it reminds me.
Let's see if I can go back to there. Right. So those little creatures which are living all of our lungs in their millions and millions are our cells, which will attempt to clean our lungs. They're good in that they will ingest all these particles, but the other thing that they do is they send out signals throughout your lungs and throughout your body, as it happens, saying, we've got a situation here in the lungs, I need help to clear it out. So what happens is all kinds of other factors are attracted to the site that the macrophages gather in, and the end of all that happening is you get inflammation. And inflammation is great, it clears up these sites, but what if you have a situation where these particles can't be cleared, they stay there, they stay in your body, not necessarily in your lungs, so what you end up with is inflammation being on permanently, and it can affect your whole body. So your whole body is in a state of increased inflammation, and that's not good. We are designed to tackle things, inflame, eradicate them, and go back to a state of peace and quiet, if you like. A bit like being a father in a family. Is it harmful? Well, yes. This is there's a lot of research goes on in this type of thing. So I've just kept it very simple. It can clean our lungs, but it can also cause damage. There's lots of research going on in a whole variety of illnesses and diseases linked to exposure to particulates. And things that are coming up already that seem to be caused is dementia, and cognitive decline seems to be linked to outdoor air pollution and particulates. Cardiovascular disease and strokes are linked to these particulates, and even cancer of the breast, liver and pancreas can be linked to this stuff. So it's potentially very harmful indeed, and it is very easy to say that this stuff is causing a lot more disease than we realized 20, 30 years ago. And there's plenty of evidence as to why we should be taking action to stop this stuff getting into our air that we're breathing. Not only that, we've got this, maybe a lot of this PM 2.5 that I've been talking about up to now is from things being burned, from fossil fuels being burned. That kind of thing has been going on for centuries, essentially. But this stuff, plastic, has only been around 70 years or so. There are now particulates made out of plastic. This stuff will also attract the macrophages, and you'll get the same scenario. But at the moment, we know a lot less about these plastics and their impact on inflammation and our health. So this is an area that requires a lot of research quite urgently. Also note that this stuff you can be found in drinking water and the sea and the rivers and everywhere else. We're more familiar with this stuff, hay fever and allergies caused by mold, pollen in the air. That makes us miserable enough. However, considering we're talking about global warming as well, this stuff and these allergies can be made worse by air pollution. People living in the urban environment have been found to suffer hay fever symptoms twice as severe compared with those in rural areas. So there's something about the urban environment, and that is probably particulate pollution and ozone for that matter. When the sun is shining in polluted areas, there it is, ozone can be generated far more in urban areas, and that's due to the car pollution that cars are emitting. So this stuff makes things even worse. We know that exposure of children to air pollution is linked to the development of allergies and asthma. Interestingly, it actually alters the bacteria on the skin of children who live in areas of high air pollution. And we know this type of thing, the skin microbiome, is linked to various types of skin disease, including eczema. There's a big study done in China quite recently, looking at the exposure of children to outdoor and indoor air pollution, linking to food allergy. And it's the first time that a food allergy has been linked with outdoor air pollution. So the influence of this stuff is far more far-reaching than we may have thought. And the purpose of this article was really to increase awareness of these facts. Heat waves. Heat waves are not only unpleasant if you don't particularly like, you can't cool yourself down enough. They're also increasing mortality, the rate of people dying, due to, if they're in areas of poor air quality, the number of people who die in a heat wave is 20 times higher than those who live in good air quality, which is an extraordinary figure. There are probably higher ozone levels and other pollutants made in hot weather and high pollution. Hot weather and high pollution tends to interact and multiply the amount of toxins in the air. People spend more time out of doors in hot weather and so are exposed to air pollution more. That might be another reason why. interesting, not particularly surprising, location matters in general. More deprived neighbourhoods tend to have poorer air quality, while richer, leafier areas have quieter, cleaner streets. So this tends to affect more deprived neighbourhoods disproportionately to those who live in quieter, cleaner streets. However, this is not an absolute rule by any chance, and there are very expensive parts of London that are also very polluted. So the air is all of us need this air. The air belongs to all of us, and all of us will eventually suffer from polluted air unless we do something about it. There was an interesting study done on occupation. You would have thought certain occupations would be worse for exposure to air pollution than others. But interestingly, I'm not particularly sure why this class of people in particular, ambulance drivers were the most exposed people in the study to outdoor air pollution, which was, you can sort of see why, but you could have thought that other occupational groups would be more exposed than ambulance drivers, but that's what the study told us. And some of the least exposed people are office workers whose air is filtered mechanically. That supports the theory that it is the particulates, because the particulates are being filtered out here, that are causing this ill health, rather than gases which won't be filtered out by mechanical ventilation. There is a link between aspergillus, you'll be delighted to know, and air pollution. A recent paper looked at the impact air pollution has on people who have different lung microbiomes. Your lung microbiome is the collection of microbes that live in your airways. They live in all of our airways, even the people who are not ill or have a disease of any sort. They're there completely normally, and they don't cause any harm. And they can be bacteria, fungus, or viruses. They just sit there growing quite happily in a commensal form. That means that they're not causing any symptoms. What this particular group did was look at the lung microbiome and looked at lung function. And they found that aspergillus, people who have more aspergillus in their lungs and airways than normal, so there are probably, I don't think they targeted particularly people with ABPA, but they just measured the amount of aspergillus in people's lungs. But we do know people with ABPA have a higher fungal lung burn than other people. Those people also tend to have poorer lung function when exposed to these particulates, PM 2.5, compared with those who don't. So there is a link. If you have aspergillus in your lungs, you have reason to try and avoid particulate pollution a little bit more than most people. This suggests that aspergillus is involved in causing some of the damage. We do not understand how or why this is happening at the moment, so that is something that needs research. Try to avoid using things like domestic burning. That could be wood stoves, coal, oil. Some of those things are not avoidable for some people, but we try and limit your exposure to that type of thing. Industrial processes, occupational exposure, particularly chemical and steel making, would be a prominent source of air pollution of the type that would be difficult for someone with aspergillosis. Diesel-powered road transport, try not to hang around busy roads, because that's a prime place for this type of pollution. And of course, industrial combustion. So if you're living near an industrial park where there is heavy machinery operating, then that's something to consider limiting your exposure to. This is the UK government website, which actually measures emissions of air pollutants in the UK, PM10 and PM 2.5, and it tells you what the pollution levels in your area are likely to be. I think this is in more or less in real time, maybe once a week, something like that. And to finish on a slightly upbeat note, here's the levels of particulates since 1970 in the air around us, and you can see it has dropped dramatically. In the 70s we had the removal of coal from heating. Then they had the smokeless fuels came in and then gradually removed, I guess. Whatever is happening, we have achieved an overall, what's that, something like getting on for a 10-fold reduction in PM10s in the outside air. So there is a lot of, that's obviously good news. There's a lot less of it out there to worry about than there was 30, 40 years ago. So let's hope that that trend carries on. And that's it for that bit.